Great cowboy boots have a historic process behind how they are made, but what about where they are made? Custom bootmaker Sarah Guerin, also known as La Saboteuse, has a small shop in Wakefield, Massachusetts called a 10-footer. So my wife and I were curious about the history behind small shops like this and why Saboteuse likes making custom boots here.
So my husband wanted to build me a shop and was, plotted out where he's going to put it. And I was on the planning board and I'm a total zoning nerd. So I went and looked up how you got a permit for the shed, which was totally fine. We got the permit and he was talking about building it, but then got deployed. So he wasn't going to, it was in the works and he had put a foundation it's like a footing. It's not really a foundation in and then left. And in that time, I was like, well, I can't really have a shop out there because it's a zoning violation, because I looked up the zoning and I'm the only one that cared about it because nobody really cares about zoning in a shed in your backyard, but I do. And so I started looking at different zoning for artist workshops in different towns, and some towns had, these independent standing structures and others didn't, and, there's no rhyme or reason to it. And I saw the Lynn Museum had this little shed thing that looked like a workshop, and went by there and they were like, this was a shoe workshop, and mind blown, like this is exactly what I want to do. Can I learn more about this because I'm going to rewrite the zoning in my town? So that was like one of my first big projects with discovering what 10-footers were all about. So I went to the Lynn Archive Library and found all those newspaper articles from the 1890s on these 10-footers. And at the time my thought was, okay, I'm going to rewrite the zoning because it's good and right. Like people should be able to, especially artists, should be supported and be able to have an art studio out in your yard if you want. But also, like, your family could function in a way with your shop out in your yard in the way that I was struggling with because my kids were little. Like, I want to work, but I can't work because I need to be home with them, and we didn't do daycare, but this was like the perfect solution. And then here it is, it's kind of against the law in zoning law, and that's just not right. So I started, petitioning our town, and we went to town meeting, and I wrote, it's like 2 pages of zoning law to have essentially a 10-footer in your yard again legally in Wakefield, and it passed at town meeting. And then when he came back, I was like, okay, I want the building to look like a 10-footer, because before it was just going to be this little studio and we didn't really have a plan for it or anything. So he went and got all the wood rough sawmilled up in New Hampshire, and to make it look kind of old and rustic, and then it's insulated on the far side of the ledger board, so it's an insulated building but looks like it's not. It's 11 by 14, and 10-footers, ironically, were almost none of them were 10 feet by 10 feet. So they were called, like all these old books and newspaper articles about the 10-footers, they were called 10-footers because that was like in theory that they were 10 by 10 structures, but almost none of them are. And in fact, most around are like 12 by 12, or they are preserved ones in different towns around, and I have yet to see one that's 10 by 10. There's like 60 of 10-footers left in Lynn in 1899 when those newspaper articles were written, and half of them were moved from one site to another. So I imagine that at some point, not too much bigger than this, it'd be too cumbersome to move regularly because they were moving these things pretty regularly from one plot of land to another. Certainly keeping them warm was an issue, and I have a book called Sketches of Lynn by David Johnson, who was a shoemaker in a 10-footer when he was a kid, and then he wrote this book in 1880 about 50 years of change in the shoe industry, and what a period of change, because it changed so drastically. But he talks about how in the very early days when he was started, it was a little fireplace in the corner. It wasn't even like a coal stove yet. Like they hadn't invented cold stoves, or it hadn't come to Lynn yet. And then when the coal stoves came, then they got a little potbelly stove. I'm happy with what I got as far as workspace. I do wish for more space for storing leather. I wish I had a bigger work table that didn't have stuff on it, because every surface in here, even if it's well organized to me, it has a lot of stuff on it. So I've applied for some artist residencies, and I always hope to get them because they're bigger spaces and I could just see what it's like to work in a bigger space, but I have no desire to get more equipment. I'm not expanding. I hope to expand toward more stability, not more production.
Before we left this amazing shop, Sarah gave us a great sound clip summarizing why building custom cowboy boots in a 10-footer makes so much sense.
What's so amazing about the cowboy boots in particular is they're still made the way that shoes were made when 10-footers people were making shoes. So, that's pretty much gone away. Super high-end men's dress shoes are still made that way, but that's pretty much disappeared, except for cowboy boots. And the best part is that they're made with like the intent to repair. And it's the best part. It's it's responsible. It's they're your character. You feel good in them. You wear them to the point where you resole them again. Like everything about it is good, and ties cowboy boot world to that old idea of how things were made.
Cowboy boots have so much history. La Saboteuse builds them in a 10-footer up in the Northeast, taking pride in tradition and creativity. She builds boots in the 10-footer. It's the place to be. Yeah. Thanks so much for watching today. Why don't you check out my entire interview that I did with La Saboteuse back in 2020 up here. Or I got a music video down here I think you might enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Have a good one.